can't all agree at the bare minimum that a giant comet the size of Mount Everest hurtling its way towards planet Earth is not a fucking good thing, then what the hell happened to us? I mean, my God, how do we even talk to each other? What have we done to ourselves? How do we fix it?
Don't Look Up has quickly soared to the #1 spot on Netflix. Like Squid Game and its pertinently critical tone, it has become one of the more celebrated pieces of media in some time. Immediately, in my mind, there are two large things that Don't Look Up showcases: human connection, relation with art, the material semblances of now. Things that are relational to us, as humans. And to contrast this human commentary, the film showcases culture, and its reproduction within systems. An analysis of systems can be rather cold, and because of this, I will try not to leave the human and relationship outside of this video. This film is ultimately a critique, and with critique, namely around systems and its consequences, it remains relevant among, and ironically, because of those very systems, namely, and more specifically, that being capitalism. We will get more to that later. On Don't Look Up, the satirical film centers on two astronomers, one played by Leonardo DiCaprio, a tenured professor at Michigan State, and a PhD candidate played by Jennifer Lawrence, who discovered an apocalyptic-level comet that is heading towards Earth, in their journey trying to warn governments and industry across the globe. Undoubtedly similar to the likes of Squid Game, Don't Look Up's narrative is intrinsically tied to the innate flow of capital, and the systems it fundamentally controls, its reaches within human decision-making and ideology. And yes, these two films/TV shows are about capitalism, not communism, you massive goofballs.
I think Squid Game is... I don't think it's overtly political. Apparently, you know, you were telling me, Gary, that it was like, there's like a political message in Squid Game.
Yeah, the writer, at least that's what he said.
My takeaway from it was communism bad. That was my takeaway from it.
The creator called it a fable for modern day capitalism, but also for life and the competitiveness of life. And that message, it's not subtle at the end.
Crazy anyone even has to add this, considering both creators literally confirm this. Again, disturbing they even have to clarify that in the first place, as in Squid Game, I couldn't imagine the point being more clear. Anyways, it's important to clarify here, this video, understanding late capitalism, systems theory, and how Don't Look Up showcases these things exceptionally. None of this will be centered on immediate moralization though, on a value judgment. Whether capitalism can be categorically centered as good or bad, desirable, non-desirable, I have no interest in doing this. Rather, I want to explore the relationship that systems play on ideology, individuality, consciousness, and human activity. And, as we will show throughout the video, human inactivity, passivity, in the end. I will also add that throughout this video I will avoid spoilers. I will not compromise tangible plot points of the movie and its subsequent conclusions, even though some clips will be shown. So you are safe with this one if you wish to view the movie after, which, if you haven't seen it, you really should. So to most, we all know what capitalism is, or at least, I severely hope so, but a lingering question may be, what is late capitalism? What is this late that weird fringe academics talk about? And further, to answer this, we will have to transition past the intro and get into the core of things. So, let's do just that.
You guys told us the science was 100%, and it's not. And now we look like idiots.
No. Who said the science is not 100%? I want to talk to this person. You tell me who said the science is not solid.
Dr. Jocelyn Calder, the head of NASA, just came out calling it more near-miss hysteria.
She's the one who told us not to say anything.
More near-miss hysteria.
Is she even an astronomer?
She's the head of NASA, but maybe she doesn't know what she's talking about.
Yeah, she's the head of NASA, but look, she's a former anesthesiologist and a President-Arlene super donor.
Okay, so we have a massive world-ending comet hurling towards Earth, with credentialed astronomers trying to warn the world of impending doom. While this threat is falling on deaf ears, how did we get to here? If this question still seems insurmountable, let me rephrase. We have an apocalyptic shift in climate patterns across the globe, where 99% of scientists agree with said apocalyptic conclusions. A current viral pandemic in which mutated strains are constantly popping up, with an almost guaranteed chance that something more deadly will emerge, all with a quite large human population that rejects the merits of these things. Climate change, and an actual pandemic. Here we can ask the question again, how did we get here? To truly answer this, or to attempt to, is going to take a long explanation, so bear with me here. I think this explanation will be worth it, and after viewing Don't Look Up, I hope this sheds some light around the deeper cultural and economic subtleties of the film, and around us. There's certainly a number of concepts that can help explain Don't Look Up, but one thing that absolutely sticks out to me is the concept of late capitalism, or late-stage capitalism, depending on what you want to call it. But more importantly, its cultural effect. Now, we know what capitalism is. We know that it is the literal economic system pretty much every country adheres to. But what separates capitalism from late capitalism is quite simple, perhaps a bit too simple. As the name implies, late capitalism is just a name for capitalism within a current time period and productive stage. Namely, when late capitalism is used, it encapsulates around the mid-20th century to today. To understand this, there is a little bit of history here that requires explanation and how capitalism has changed throughout time. Late capitalism was first coined by the German economist and sociologist Werner Sombart around the different stages of capitalism through history, say proto-capitalism, early capitalism, heyday capitalism, and late capitalism. But Sombart's use of late stage isn't really what we mean by late stage capitalism today. In today's context, we use late stage capitalism as an epoch that describes a type of capitalism that is explored through its own newer, often pathological contradictions. The method here is what is important, and that method is dialectics, primarily under a Marxist or even young Hegelian context. Dialectics is far too broad of a concept to sum up here, and it means vastly different things to different thinkers, from people like Plato, Aristotle, to something more similar between people like Hegel and Marx. So I won't be doing a huge explanation on dialectics exactly, but in a sociological or even economic context seen within Marxism, it can be seen as a mechanism that examines contradictions to show something, in this case capitalism's, total nature and effect. For example, under the traditional Marxist idea, when capitalism grows its economic height, it often creates some of the strongest conditions for its own collapse due to monopoly, wealth inequality, worker dissatisfaction, etc. And it is through this dialectical method of examining these contradictions within capitalism, we can see capitalism as the total system that it is. With a Marxist approach, this is how late capitalism got its contemporary meaning from Ernest Mandel, who wrote his 1972 PhD dissertation, Late Capitalism. It is here that this concept is birthed into its contemporary meaning. From here, Mandel, among other scholars throughout the 20th century, were noticing an increasingly active, more grand, global form of capitalism that contrasted the former model of capitalism pre-1940s. From history onward, capitalism seemed to thrive under a model of steep imperialist competition over resources and material markets internationally. No wonder that direct colonialism was quite literally at its peak before World War II. Not that colonialism is gone today, just that in late capitalism it's much more indirect. We will get more to this, and I promise this is relevant to Don't Look Up, so bear with me. It seems that, for most, the picture capitalism paints for us is still one of predated industrialized colonial capitalism. A system of economic rigidity, a system of unwavering contracts and rules, where each team, brand, in lieu of state functions, is in competition within a zero-sum game of resources and financial accumulation. Late-stage capitalism in many ways mirrors this in the opposite light. It is rather flexible. Today, capitalism has arguably flipped from its initial point. Capitalism is global, not really in a competitive sense per se, but cooperative sense. Competition isn't gone, but in many regards, the driving mechanism is corporate merging, rather than mere elimination. This is where prior in-looks at imperialism and colonialism are slightly limited in today's context. Imperialism now functions down the pipeline of multiple organizations and states. In the past, it was a much more linear process. Because of this, we have multinational corporations that facilitate goods and services literally everywhere, despite borders and state endeavors. Marketplaces, currencies, don't really have a material referent anymore. Capital now primarily exists as something merely speculative, the promise of return often before any production has begun. On its core level, something that now bases its existence not on production, but consumption. Buying for investors, creating platforms, say like Netflix, then purchasing exclusive content to rent out to potential customers. Thus the marking of a flipped system not of initial production, but consumption, where money is becoming more and more atmospheric. Much of this development has spawned new forms of economic study, things such as modern monetary theory. Alright, we now know some of the evolution of capitalism, and how marketplaces, the model of production and consumption, have evolved. But what are the human effects of this, and how does this change culture, institutions, and systems around us? Here's where we answer the question of, how the hell did we get to the point of no one giving a f about a world-ending comment, and even more important, how the f do we get to a point where people don't care about this? When I think of a question such as this, Theodor Adorno, a German philosopher and theorist, comes to mind. He quotes, "The triumph of advertising in the culture industry is that consumers feel compelled to buy and use its products even though they see through them." I think about this quote quite often, but in the case of Don't Look Up, this logic of not only recognizing absurdity, legitimizing said absurdity all the less. This all brings us to Spinoza, the modern Dutch philosopher, and his famous question, why do people fight for their servitude as if it were their salvation? Adorno and Spinoza, if anything, can be used to recognize the very dilemma within Don't Look Up. Don't Look Up doesn't necessarily center itself on the technicalities that is social and economic systems, the things we've just been talking about. It's far more human than that, and arguably much, much deeper and sophisticated. Even when discussing late capitalism, this is where we should bring in Frederick Jameson, a philosopher and critical theorist who helped propel late capitalism to the wider eye of academia, and its relationship with the concept of postmodernism as a whole. Postmodernism is initially a confusing concept that, if you have been on the internet, has been seemingly hijacked by this guy and other reactionary commentators, all into something totally different than its own academic foundations or meaning. Ironically, that's the most postmodern thing they could have done, even according to their own skewed definitions of it.
And now look, the postmodernists were Marxists, so let's make no mistake about that.
Besides the point, we have talked about postmodernism frequently on this channel, namely under Jameson's context, which I believe to be the arguably best explanation for its cultural emergence, so I won't go into massive detail around it. The term is so broad, ranging from architecture, art theory, but in many contexts, postmodernism can be defined as mass skepticism seen by certain narratives under modernism, ideals of grand truths or of human nature. But in my opinion, the concept is most realized under Frederick Jameson, postmodernism as the result of hyper-globalized commodification of daily life, late capitalism. This is exactly where Jameson's book Postmodernism, or the Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism, stems from. What is significant here is that postmodernism is treated as something resistant to modernism, of liberal beliefs around rationality, science, human unity, organization, and even tones of togetherness. But what is significant is that the realization of postmodernism only can come from modernism. So if your critique of postmodernism comes from modernity, well, then you're missing the point entirely. This stark change in cultural outlook is incredibly present. A country such as the United States, its embedded stark modernism, starting from the Founding Fathers, growth around the economy, pursuit of radical individuality. It only makes sense that we are now where we are at, and Don't Look Up. where we worship tech billionaires, broadcast every small subtlety on social media. This scene shows this level of pathological, commodified individuality when Kate Diabosky's boyfriend, a wannabe journalist, just out of nowhere capitalizes on the stark criticism she was getting when trying to warn the world of impending doom.
That prick!
What happened?
That's my boyfriend just broke up with me.
Oh, God. What a day.
He would rather create a career, financial opportunity for himself than, do little things like be a decent person. Plus, there's even more here. Kate Diabosky is completely overshadowed by Professor Mendy for her discovery, even when Dr. Mendy named the comet after her and reminded everyone it was in fact her who made the discovery. If not blatant commentary on the extreme sexism and misogyny women still face, we see that there's a systemic tone to this, in industry. Precisely this scene when Kate gets shut down.
I'm so sorry. Are we not being clear? We're trying to tell you that the entire planet is about to be destroyed.
Okay.
Well, it's just something we do around here. We just keep the bad news light.
So tomorrow we've got a
Well, maybe the destruction of the entire planet isn't supposed to be fun. Maybe it's supposed to be terrifying.
Here, she's far too human. The result, too far away from maintaining a uniform behavioral facade postmodern society creates. Just like in this world, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC will quite literally admit they don't do stories on climate change because it simply doesn't sell. The story of a world-ending comet also doesn't sell. Thus, it is systemically relegated to the more important thing, money and entertainment, to hedonism. With how modernism, its internal mechanical logic that pushes efficiency, the most efficient thing to do to increase productivity, to increase wealth, is to do the absolute most diabolical, often stupid and horrible things. Yet what's important isn't just what media companies will showcase. It's that even within viable critique, within activism, capital always finds its way. That, in many ways, the critique of capitalism finds itself the most commodifiable. The film shows this irony at a concert by Riley Bina, someone who mimics the pop stars of our own current world. She plays a concert at an event that's trying to not only spread awareness of the disastrous comet, but trying to put tangible political pressure on the state. It's like we stated before in the intro. There will always be an irony within capitalism. Critique of capitalism must be commodified to exist at all. Thus, in continuity with this, Don't Look Up is breaking records on Netflix. When we engage with economic systems like capitalism, the most potent analysis, in my mind, is only possible when we siphon out our existing social and economic order, which here is liberal democracy. I found Don't Look Up to be one of the most rare examples of satire that actually shows political economy and its giant human, not to mention ecological, effect. This movie pries away at the facade that is liberal democracy. The president and her chief of staff's son are idiotic and apathetic to say the least, but this is where satire would normally leave it. The mere stupidity of elected officials, their out-of-touch inadequacies. Say Trump's boisterous thirst of power, and Biden's personal apathy to garner change. Personalization is irrelevant though, it's not about them. They fundamentally control little. Personalization doesn't matter. You know what does matter? This guy. We will get into him more later. Billionaires and capital at large is what truly matters, and as much as I absolutely love the movie Office Space and its commentary around corporate bureaucracy, it leaves little to no systemic explanation as to why this corporate culture exists within the movie and in real life in the first place. Don't Look Up is a rarity, and it shows the fundamental problems via the lens of political economy and its human effect. So let's get into those human effects. Here we begin with us, a normalized subject amidst systems, objects, and other exterior things. The long project that is philosophy has always tried to explain what the self is. What is us? What is, in the language of philosophy, the subject? There are many different theories on this, but the one in my mind truly articulated in Don't Look Up is the Hegelian notion of self, from the German philosopher Hegel, a self that is only recognized from others, objects, the collective, institutions, and systems. Here, this difference dialectically mediates. It allows us to recognize ourselves precisely because the exterior world around us is different. And Don't Look Up, Kate Diabosky, the PhD student who discovered the comment, and her professor, Dr. Mendy, are stuck in a limbo, an utter force field of difference amongst the system around them.
Am I to understand correctly that after all of the information you've received today, the decision you're making is to sit tight and assess?
I'm sorry, who is she?
Who the fuck are you? Aren't you her son?
I'm the fucking chief of staff boy with the dragon tattoo, so I'm doing fine.
Gotta get out of here. This place is a freak show.
I think what Ms. Dibiaski is trying to say is that the idea of sitting tight is an extremely, extremely dangerous...
Thank you. One good thing happened today. Okay, funny story.
Here, alienation in the Hegelian context is nothing but present. The stark difference between them, the subject and the system, objects around them. This difference is stark and representative of how we can feel alienated amongst systems around us. We feel alien to it, pacified, and utterly foreign amidst its power. Yet, to Hegel, this difference is something that allows us to recognize ourselves as an individual. But again, we need the exterior to do so. But this is the problem. Here in the White House, there isn't any mediation. There's very little feedback. And what historically happens when mediation isn't present? Here the film actively wonders. After meeting with the White House, with the characters, the clear question of what the absolute fuck is going on is totally present. Kate Diabosky is clearly an already progressively minded, cynical character. Cynical of power, institutions, but even here she can't believe the extent of what is going on. It's earth-shattering to both. The further excursus into this film leads us directly into the culture of integrated sameness. This is why Jameson is also important here. His philosophy of late capitalism directly stems from the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, just under newer context around the end of the 20th century. Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer pointed out the constant sameness capitalism produced, its reliance of coercion in the workplace, its required uniformity in art, all in order to just financially survive. Capitalism, even to this day, nonetheless when the Dialectic of Enlightenment was written in the 30s, has been seen as a system of raw individuality and transcendence of self, being able to operate as a total free agent in your personal pursuit of happiness. We've covered the Dialectic of Enlightenment, so if interested, I'll leave a link here. Regarding individuality within capitalism, to so many, living paycheck to paycheck is clearly idealized nonsense, even if systemically accepted. A sales pitch for you to buy your way into a system that pyramid schemes you into absolute, unfettered uniformity. It's through this 20th century philosophy that started with the Frankfurt School that we can actualize, reiterate, give language to the deep feeling of immense, forced uniformity. A uniformity, or else you will be fired, or else you will be ostracized, or if you dare to attempt your creative dreams, that lead you to potential starvation. That capitalism, in the end, is the actual collectivist system. You do exactly what it wants. Not the typical precept of that dreaded socialism all kinds of people talk about. The flows of capital are just that, systemic flows. President Orlin and Don't Look Up, which, what a wild name. President Orlin, New Orleans, one of the most endangered cities in the world. President Orlin is the very representation of conscious capital, as capitalism creates a subversive uniformity out of its subjects. It's clear that capitalism does our thinking for us. We think of the able-bodied subject who number crunches, comes up with great creative marketing strategy, is revolutionizing entrepreneurial strategy and business, the social archetype of what we consider to be a genius. The thing is, this archetype, this practice of ingenuity, isn't conscious. The guideline of creativity is already laid out by capital for us. It's predetermined on market relations and financial opportunity. You didn't actually get to think of what you thought of. Capital did that for you. Don't Look Up showcases this with Peter Isherwell perfectly, a tech billionaire that mimics the personality of billionaires in our world. Peter is practically unanimously worshipped, the grand individual whose genius, whose work ethic allows him to prosper as a god on earth. And in late capitalism, that's what we are all after, right? Like President Orlin, Peter isn't conscious at all. There's nothing within him that truly lives. In many ways, this is how capital is parasitic, an infection, a global pandemic within us, people being its very host. And the facade, the symptoms of this infection being unfettered uniformity and activity finally laid out by capital. But with uniformity, it's important to reiterate that we are uniform in the pursuit of unfettered individuality. We are uniform in the sense that we actively all try to stand out. Yet, because we are so embedded in the pursuit of the aesthetic of individuality, the smokescreen of it, we struggle to think, to act, to exist when dealt with actual novelty. Novelty in art, novelty in society and culture, novelty in science, and more pertinently, novelty in potential world-ending disaster. Whether that be a comet or climate change. If anything, this is what 20th century philosophy hints at everywhere, the absolute pacification of the subject in lieu of systems and power structures. Whether that be Freud, Adorno, Foucault, Lacan, and even Jameson, there's a quiet continuity here between all of them, our inability to act, or act only within very slim guidelines by that of class relations, that of capital, existing, routine, pacifying ideology. Everything within Don't Look Up centers itself upon this. There's a subconscious collective dissonance, a very dissonance shown by Frederick Jameson. Someone once said that it is easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. We can now revise that and witness the attempt to imagine capitalism by way of imagining the end of the world. What an absolute quote regarding Don't Look Up, huh? It's because of this cultural unification with capital that our immense potential of human imagination is shattered. It's been flattened, outsourced into fantasy that we can consume on screen, a commodified ideology, or people we can moralize on the internet. We cannot think of a better world, because that very imagination can only exist within the confines of it, the very basis for Mark Fisher's capitalist realism, which we have covered on this channel. Link above if you are interested. As satire goes, as a medium, its direct critique is what usually gets the attention. But within satire, there are always hidden subtexts in between the lines. Don't Look Up is no different. There are, at times, seemingly random droning shots of Earth, people, and animals all throughout the globe. The subtext here is clear. It's what is constantly at stake. The things that we take for granted, the very thing given to us that we are so eager to relinquish in the name of modern, phantasmic niceties, namely capital, money. At every point in the movie and in our lived society, we cling to ghost, atmospheric ideals that have no material contact with us. The droning shots of nature, our world, if anything, showcases that absurdity, the materiality that we take for granted, the grand prize that is planet Earth, something that could only be sculpted amidst billions of years of precise evolution, something that, despite the vastness of our near universe, we have yet to find a planet that comes close to our own. All of this gone for an economic system that hasn't even lasted a fourth of human history. Amidst humanity, the quiet subtext this movie also leans on is art. All the small things that could be forgotten without quiet contemplation, without a reminder of what we actually have. This reminder is present here.
Mills Brothers. It's a great band. Duke Ellington found this with some harmony. Till then, this is the song. It's about soldiers going off to World War II and thinking about home. Although there are oceans we must cross and mountains we must climb, I know that every gain must have a loss. So pray that our loss is nothing but time.
This is arguably the most powerful scene in a movie I have ever seen. It needs no music, no large gestures, and pointing out the beautiful subtleties of life, this scene simply remains subtle. This scene shows the special mundaneness of life. The things we most remember, the things we feel the most aren't large events, completing those checklists that life demands. It's the things in between, like driving to the grocery store, listening to a song. It's the small things. It's art that makes existence not worth living, but possible in the first place. It's here that the film hints at a slight answer to this, or at least a potential in sifting past the systemically instilled pacification around us, of just waiting idly by at the prospect of the world ending because of us. The message here, in my mind, is that art can be the large reminder, the subtle vehicle that reminds us that life isn't just those huge, degrading checklist work requirements, quotas to meet to make sure you aren't a failure. But it's art that reminds us of the little things of a holistic life that can be. And with these glimpses, these small reminders hopefully drive us to fight for that kind of world. If anything, art gives a meaning that we can recognize in someone like Spinoza, who conceptualized something similar to human emotion, which he calls affect. Affect being the ability to affect others, the world, while opening yourself to be affected as well. In a Spinozian sense, we can only channel this emotion-like thing in relation to others, within movement, working together. If anything, art seems to be one vehicle of affect, of an easier language, an emotion that transcends self and affects us all. It's undeniable that to curtail any disaster in our world, whether that be climate change, whether that be our own current pandemic, it will require a vast amount of human organization that will have to supersede any state initiative or even any private initiative. As we can see, capital really cannot allow those systems to operate in any adequate capacity. It's going to be up to us, and hopefully, if anything, Don't Look Up showcases that art might be the very affect or vehicle that might kick organization to gear, to a recognition that we really had it all, and that all is about to be taken away right from us.
We really did have everything, didn't we? I mean, when you think about it.
Thank you guys for watching and making it to the end. I really enjoyed Don't Look Up and thought it was one of the more smart pieces of satire we've ever gotten. And hopefully more than anything, my spontaneous inspiration to make a video over Don't Look Up landed with you all. Truly, I couldn't do it without all you guys on Patreon, and of course, I have the same request once again. If anyone here isn't a Patreon and they enjoy this channel and want to help and ensure it survives, just a couple dollars a month makes all of that possible and more. I want to give an extra thank you and an extra shout out to these personal patrons: J.R. Ogg, Kate, Seveth9, Stacy Solano, and Valerian. Thank you so much. You guys truly go above and beyond, and I really couldn't do this without your support. Truly, again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you, and for the rest, I really hope you enjoyed. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next video.